Hello everyone, today we're going to be customizing this Breyer Paddock Pal I found at Five Below. The first thing I need to do is remove these rubbery mane and tail bits. I do not trust this plastic enough for the paints to be stable on it because it moves around so easily. We don't want the paint and stuff cracking after the fact. This was actually a bit more difficult than I expected. They're in there really good. It may take a little bit of effort to do. I used some wire cutters here and some pliers. And here she is with everything removed. Don't forget the ears too, because those are also rubber. Now we're going to take some epoxy and fill in a lot of those gaps that we created when we took out the hair. I'm using Apoxie Sculpt in yellow here, but you can use pretty much any sculpting epoxy. Don't use regular hardware store epoxy because you're not going to be able to sculpt with that. I learned that lesson the hard way. So we're just making a base here for the mane. For this piece, I actually really liked the way the original looked, and I want to keep as much of that as possible, so we're just doing a little bit of a glow up here. I am cutting this piece off just to kind of manipulate it around the neck so it stays flat against the neck, and I'm kind of solidifying it in there with epoxy. We don't want any gaps, we don't want it moving around, we really want it solid against the body. And now I'm removing all the bits that are overhanging, because we're going to fix that later, and just cleaning up the neck here. And now I'm incorporating some of the top of the mane back in, so we have a nice seamless transition here. What I'm using are these silicone shapers. Links will be in the description for everything. The stuff you see me dipping my tools into is actually epoxy smoothing solution. You can use regular water here or rubbing alcohol, but the smoothing solution is really great. It's almost like a combination between the two. It just does so much better of a job. If you can afford to grab some of this, it's really good. And so I'm just continuing to detail the mane into the neck there. And now I'm trying to position the forelock where I want it and just cut off that excess piece because I don't really need that. And I'm inserting a wire here and using the super glue and baking soda method. It's basically just sprinkling a lot of baking soda on the crazy glue when you want it to set instantly. And now I'm lining that forelock back up into where I had some soft epoxy still. And we're smushing that against the head to make sure it stays as best as possible. Now what I'm doing is trying to cover any of those gaps and keep that mane against the horse. In hindsight, these little fiddly bits probably would have been better done with the super glue and baking soda method, which I will do a little later. It was a little difficult to get it against the model in these little finicky areas and stay there. So the super glue is more of a quicker solution. A lot of the metal tools you see me using are either dental tools or, funny enough, Blackhead Remover tools, and one of these is actually a tool to remove the nut meat out of nutshells. So really, you can use anything that's really going to be helpful for what you want to accomplish. Again, here I'm trying to cover that gap on the bottom where the piece was sticking up, but this little piece probably would have been better off with just the super glue baking soda like I do later in the video. And the tool that I'm using here is that nut meat remover thing. Now I'm just cutting off all of the hanging bits and we'll resculpt those later against the model. which, as you can see, proved a little tedious. I needed a couple of tools to do this. I don't know if my tools were just dull or it's just this rubbery plastic and I didn't want to pull off everything I just did. But just take your time, you'll get it. And again, filling back in the gaps and just preparing that little area for the mane later. Now what I'm doing here, I'm dipping my Q-tip in some smoothing solution and getting all the excess junk off that, you know, my fingers may have touched or just pieces that I don't want there. I'm basically just smoothing it off. Trying to keep things clean now so I don't have to prep it so much later. Now I'm going to peg the tail to make sure it's in there really good. That rubber piece was in there very good, so it must be wrapped around the pegs that are inside the horse, so I'm not too concerned about that. I am wrapping a wire in here to make it even more solidified, plus we're going to be going against the model as well, so this shouldn't move anywhere. And now I'm adding some of the crazy glue with the baking soda method to really solidify that whole section in there so that is not going to move. Now I'm prepping the little rubbery part of the tail. This was kind of in the way. I want it flat against the model, so I'm just taking off as much as I can to do that. Here I'm just poking a hole in this side. It's super easy because the plastic is rubbery, so I just elbow greased it. And now I'm just twisting it onto that wire that we put in there. And I believe this wire I just got from the dollar store. It was in like the hardware section of a 3-pack of random wires, so it's really great for small intricate things. Now that we have the tail pretty much where we want it, we're gonna soda glue that in really good. Try and get as many of the gaps as possible because we really want that up against the model since we're reusing this rubbery plastic. We don't want it moving. And please, everyone, make sure you wear gloves when you're working. I know it's hard to sculpt with gloves and stuff on, but start getting used to it now. Find a good pair of gloves that fit your hands fairly well. I use the Costco size small. A lot of gloves are too big for my hands, and you can even see this is still a little bit too big, but it makes a world of difference for your health and everything. I used to wear gloves only when mixing the epoxy, but I ended up developing an allergy. I mean, not super allergy, but I can always tell when I've touched it now before it's cured because I start getting really itchy. My hands get really itchy. Anything I touch gets really itchy. Some people have developed really serious allergies as well, where they can't even stand it or even breathe in the fumes. So please, just wear gloves. Don't come into contact too much with this stuff. And really, this goes for everything here. The crazy glue, sanding, anything. Just wear the gloves, start getting used to them. You'll thank yourself for it in the future. And now, just like with the mane, I am cutting off the excess bits. This is a pretty big chunk, so it's gonna have to be resculpted, but I don't want it sticking up off of the horse. And again, I'm coming in with the crazy glue and solidifying that against a horse. So this is kind of like what I should have done to the front half there and not worried about the epoxy at the ends too much. Because this is just a lot easier and a lot faster, and it's just as sturdy. Plus, we're going to be putting epoxy over this as well, so it just makes your life a lot easier. And as you can see, I'm going back over those other little bits on the mane to just get as much of a grab as possible with the super glue and the baking soda. And I'm just cleaning things up a bit here, smoothing things around. Getting those gaps covered. Redetailing some areas that I smushed, which happens quite often. Time for a change of gloves, and again going back into the mane to cover any of those gaps. Now I'm going to get the ears prepared. I'm just sticking some wire in the soft epoxy right now because it's an easy way to get those in there. It helps solidify the ears to the head a lot more. I accidentally cut these a little too short, but it still ended up working out okay for me. And here she is after her first pass of epoxy. I'm going to wait till this dries before moving on because I kept smushing everything. Now I busted out the Rotary tool. I use a Black & Decker. A lot of people use Dremel. A lot of people call this a Dremel, but it's actually a Rotary tool. I'm just sanding off the big bits that are at the edge there so we can blend them into the body really well. And you see me doing these kind of dip holes along the belly and the back. This is because this is put together a little differently, I think, than regular Breyers. It's more hollow, and I just wanted to do that in order for the epoxy to grab more. I probably would have liked to do these actually a little more deeper to actually make a hole there. So it grabs the two edges together, so you're not going to end up with seam splits and stuff later down the line. So it's just a safety measure to add extra grab with the epoxy. Just carving out the hooves that are raised. We're not going to go too crazy on this girl. We just want to give her a little bit of a glow up. And now I'm just taking down some of the major seams and trying to smooth some stuff out here and there. I'm not doing anything too major, just smoothing out. Getting rid of any major seams so it saves me some time in prepping. And there she is after her dremeling session. I've smoothed out the end bits as much as I could and added those little grab points along the back and the belly, shaved off the logo, and carved the raised hooves. Now I'm going to take my carbide scrapers and just start cleaning that up a little bit, just a little on the prepping side here. Trying to get as much of those seams off as possible and smooth. Now we're going to file. Trying to get that as smooth as possible so we don't have to go too crazy when we actually prep. This here is a sanding sponge. You can get this at any hardware store. Now I'm taking an alcohol pad and just wiping the model down. This is going to get all that residue off from us touching it and all the dust and everything. What I'm doing here, I have a little pin vise, which is basically a hand drill, and I am making a hole in the groin area here, which is inconspicuous, but hollow models should have an air hole. This allows the expansion and contraction when it heats up and gets cold and stuff. This will prevent your paint from cracking, seam splits, things like that. So if you have a hollow model and there's no air hole, you should be making one. And now I'm back here with the epoxy and we're going to fill all those gaps and seams and smooth things out and start incorporating the mane and tail to the final result that we want. Again, paying close attention to any gaps and such. With that rubbery plastic against the hard plastic, you want to make sure that that is solidified in as best as possible. This was a little annoying using the epoxy to get this smooth up at the top, and I keep having to remind myself that I'm going to have to sand this later, so I always struggle getting things like that smooth. But just remember, you can sand this later, so you don't have to go too crazy. And now I'm making these little sort of noodles at the end of the mane and tail to sculpt the detail back in. So this is going to be the end of our tail. If I was going to redo this tail completely, I probably wouldn't have made it as big and fluffy, but I really liked the way the original was, so I kind of want to keep that essence and safely incorporate it back into the body here. So it did make it a little bit longer than the original, but I really liked that original mane and tail, so I really wanted to kind of keep as much of it as possible. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. I just generally prefer a less floofy tail, so it's whatever your preference is, really. And the epoxy looks wet because, again, I'm using that smoothing solution to help smooth the tools along the epoxy as I sculpt. Usually when you don't have stuff like this, it'll kind of crumb up and get really annoying, so that's the smoothing solution there, really helping move the tools along. And then sometimes you can take a brush and just brush some on to smooth off any roughness that you have. And I'm going to do the same thing for the mane here, finishing up those ends and covering all the gaps and getting it against the body. You want to work your way to finer and smaller tools as you go so you can get more and more detail, as you can notice here. And since we altered this mane a little bit where we had to cut off that extra piece, we're going to have to put something back. So I kind of wanted to fold it into the other half, sort of like the bottom half is kind of coming over the top half, just for a little elegance, I think. And leave the small area for the bridle path there. And now I'm just going in with the alcohol wipe to clean up some of the edges there. And here she is on her second pass of epoxy. We're going to let this cure so we can now sand, sand, sand. So sand all those areas smooth to get a new starting point for your next layer of epoxy. And again, we're going in here with the alcohol wipe to get all that sanding dust off. And you could give it another bath, but it's not really too necessary at this point. What I did forget to mention at the beginning of this video is that you do want to give your model a good bath before you start, getting all the factory residue off and all that stuff, so stuff sticks well. I'll put a link in the description to the video I did on washing your models. And now for our next round of epoxy. So I did have to Dremel down a lot of the chest area here because that's where the seams were put together and it didn't have much detail in there. So I'm going in here, adding a little bit of a chest, adding some wrinkles there, just making it a little more realistic while also fixing the area that I had to sand down to make more realistic. For the wrinkles, what I like to do sometimes is make some sharp lines in there, as you can see with this little sharp shaper tool. And then take the brush with the smoothing solution and brush that over it. It kind of takes down those wrinkles, and then you can work that back and forth with a smoother shaper that's not as sharp, and it kind of gives you a more subtle wrinkling that's more realistic than just kind of lines in the epoxy. I think I put a little too much epoxy on the chest here, so I'm just kind of smoothing that down a little bit and taking that down. It was a little too robust, so fiddle, fiddle, fiddle is all it really comes down to. And just incorporating all that, these little pieces, making it smooth in to make it more cohesive and that it's not just a blob of epoxy sitting on top, so we want to really bring that into the sculpture. Next, we are working on the face. So the alignment of the face wasn't exactly straight, so there's some editing that needs to be done on either side. So we're going to give him a little bit more of a lip and just fix some of that detail out. Not really doing anything much as far as adding things or changing expressions, just kind of fixing this up a little so it's a little more cohesive. Like evening out the nostrils here, really just bringing this all together. And now I'm just adding that boning detail underneath the face. The original model was very flat here with not much detail, so we dremeled out a bit of a gap so we can get more of that realistic skull looking area under the chin and cheeks. And we're just blending that in. Now I'm just covering any other gapped seams that I see. And yes, now I decided to make him a gelding instead of a mare. I don't know, with the new face and everything, he didn't seem quite like a mare and didn't seem quite like a stallion either, so I went with gelding. As you see, I'm covering up that hole again, and of course I forgot to put it back in while the epoxy was soft, so we'll add that back in later, but don't forget that air hole. It needs to be there. Now I'm finishing up the little mane tendrils on the face here, or the forelock. And finishing up the detail on that little section of the mane that we had done before and the bridle path area. Now I'm adding the frogs to the hooves on the bottom that we carved out previously. The original model, they were just flat. I left the two that are on the ground flat. Again, this is just a little glow up, so the only ones that are going to be visible are the ones that are raised. And here she is with that epoxy pass. And now I'm re-drilling that air hole. And it's time for the really annoying part, the ears. Do not even ask how to explain to do these because this actually took me about 4 tries. I mean, this is the final try here. The that I decided to just go with. I just ended up making an ear-shaped blob, sticking it on that wire, and then just really trying to shape it onto the head. I don't know why this was giving me such a hard time on this model, but I was having a very, very hard time. I really wish I could have utilized the original ears, that they weren't rubber like that. I tried making a mold of it to just kind of stick them on there, but again, it didn't quite work because I edited that area a little bit. So this was the best option for this. Hopefully you have an easier time than I did, but ears and legs for me are absolutely so difficult. But I managed to get it done. So just remember, you're seeing this with a lot of cuts in it. There had to be a lot taken out of this. This was over a span of, I think, a couple of weeks. So, you know, it's not going to go as fast as this video. There's a lot of trial, there's a lot of error. Just keep doing it, keep trying. Move on to a different part if you're really frustrated, and then come back later. But if you keep doing it, you'll get it. Just keep going. Even after I finished this pass of the ears, I still needed to do a little bit of tweaking and carving off the area and putting some back on. So that's another thing you have to remember, is that you can carve and add after the fact as well. Sometimes it's easier when it's already solid. So, you know, you're not moving things around. As you can see, they move really easily here. And that's another part of the frustrating part, is they keep moving. But keep going, keep going, keep going. And here you see me carving off some excess that shouldn't be there after the fact, like I was mentioning. So now I'm just kind of tweaking what I had done in the sculpture, and definitely need to be carving out more. And here I'm using the chisel tip on my carbide scraper. I love this tip for carving ears and hooves into models. And now we're just going to sand everything smooth. Basically prep sand everything. Get all the gunkies and things off, sand it smooth again. And now we're in the final stages of prepping here. This is the Bondo spot putty. This stuff is stinky, so if you notice, I am in front of my airbrushing booth, which is taking a lot of that smell out. You might want to wear a mask. Definitely wear gloves with this stuff. It's a sort of little spot putty, basically, that helps cover all the little gaps and things. So I'm right here rubbing it along. As you can see, the sort of seams of where the epoxy and the model meet. Anything I need to smooth out. It's just easy. Dries really quick. So this is probably about 15 minutes later, and I'm able to already sand this smooth. And then once again, coming in with our alcohol wipe to get all the dust off and clean this up to get it ready for its layer of primer. But first, I need to finish up those ears. There was a little gap on one of them I needed to finish up, so that's me doing this now. And I'm also adding some little tendrils to kind of incorporate the ears into the face area and bring everything together. And there we have it. There's all the epoxy, the prepping, and ready to go for primer. And there it is in primer. So he's all ready to go. Just needs a little bit more sanding to smooth some things out and maybe a little bit more spot putty in some areas, but he is pretty much ready for paint. Again, remember all of the links to everything I speak about is in the description. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time. Bye!